This 4-year-old beggar girl is kicked out of a wedding for stealing brownies. But the millionaire groom saw everything and does something no one will ever forget. Comment what you think will happen. Your opinion is very important. And subscribe to my channel to support my work. Your help is very important. The December sun warmed the afternoon in the upscale suburb of Oakwood when the final preparations for Richard Thompson's wedding took shape in the town's most luxurious banquet hall. Tables covered with white linen cloths gleamed under the golden light that streamed through the large windows, and the scent of white roses perfumed the entire room. At 34, Richard had built his small furniture factory from scratch, becoming the most respected businessman in the region. His marriage to Vivian Sterling, a 29-year-old physical therapist known for her beauty and elegance, was the social event of the year. Vivian adjusted her wedding dress for the 10th time, admiring herself in the mirror with satisfaction. Every detail had been meticulously planned, from the imported flowers to the tasting menu that had cost a fortune. For her, this wedding represented more than just love. It was the consolidation of a social status she had always desired. "Everything is perfect," she murmured to the makeup artist, delicately touching the pearl necklace that Richard had given her as a gift. "Exactly as I always dreamed." Richard, however, felt a strange unease growing in his chest. Dressed in his impeccable tuxedo, he watched the guests arrive, businessmen, doctors, lawyers, the entire local elite. There was something artificial about the atmosphere that bothered him deeply, although he couldn't quite identify what it was. Born an orphan and raised in a foster home on the outskirts of the city, Richard knew well the difference between need and luxury. Every brick of his factory had been earned with sweat and determination, working 16 hours a day for years. His tendency to act on impulse when he saw injustice had developed early on, when he witnessed other foster children being mistreated. The ceremony went smoothly, with Vivian radiant as she received greetings from the guests. During the party, she circulated through the hall like a queen, always introducing herself as the wife of the successful businessman. Richard smiled and greeted everyone, but his mind wandered constantly. It was while heading towards the dessert table that something caught his attention. A small shadow moved furtively between the tables in the back, trying to go unnoticed by the waiters and guests. It was a girl of about 6 years old, with dirty and torn clothes, tangled hair, and large eyes that shone with hunger. Isabella had walked 2 miles from the low-income housing project where she lived with her grandmother, Constance. The smell of the sweets had reached the street, and her empty stomach had been aching for 2 days. With the innocence of her 6 years, she did not understand that she did not belong in that place. She saw only abundant food, while she and her grandmother were starving. The girl approached the brownie table, extending her small, dirty hand toward the golden treats. Her eyes widened with delight at seeing so much abundance together. She had never seen anything so beautiful and appetizing. "Hey! What is this girl doing here?" shouted one of the security guards, quickly advancing toward Isabella. The child was startled, dropping some brownies on the floor. Nearby guests stopped talking, looking with disdain and indignation at the little intruder. Some began to mutter among themselves, comments about how outrageous, and where are this child's parents. "Get her out of here immediately!" exclaimed a lady in a blue dress, moving away as if Isabella were contagious. "She's making a mess!" The security guard grabbed Isabella's thin arm with unnecessary force, causing the girl to let out a whimper of pain and fear. Tears began to stream down her dirty face as she tried to break free, whispering an almost inaudible, "Please." Richard watched the whole scene paralyzed, feeling something churning in his stomach. The expression of desperate hunger on Isabella's face instantly transported him back to his own childhood, when he himself had known the feeling of having an empty stomach for days on end. "Let her go," said Richard, approaching the security guard with a firm voice. "Mr. Thompson, this girl crashed your party. "I will remove her immediately," replied the man, still holding Isabella. "I told you to let her go," repeated Richard, this time with unquestionable authority. The security guard reluctantly obeyed, and Isabella fell seated on the floor, trembling with fear and confusion. Richard knelt beside her, noticing her bare and bruised feet, the clothes that looked more like rags, the obvious signs of malnutrition. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Isabella," whispered the girl, wiping away the tears with the back of her dirty hand. Vivian appeared beside her husband like a hurricane, her perfect face contorted with irritation. She had noticed that the guests were all looking at the scene, and that was ruining her perfect wedding. "Richard, what are you doing? Send this girl away right now," she hissed between her teeth, trying to maintain a forced smile for the guests. "She's hungry," replied Richard, still looking at Isabella. "And what does that have to do with us? Call someone to take her away before she ruins our party." The coldness in Vivian's voice made Richard slowly raise his eyes to face her. It was the first time he had heard that tone from his wife, a cruelty he had never noticed during their 2 years of dating. Richard got up slowly, picked up a plate from the table, and filled it with brownies, chocolate chip cookies, and other sweets. He handed it to Isabella, who accepted it with wide eyes of surprise and gratitude. "Go home carefully," he said gently. Isabella nodded vigorously, hugged the plate against her chest as if it were a treasure, and ran out of the hall, leaving behind an awkward silence and dozens of disapproving glances. Vivian grabbed Richard's arm tightly, her nails digging into his skin through the fabric of the tuxedo. "You just humiliated our entire family in front of the whole town," she whispered with venom. "This will never happen again, understand?" Richard looked at the woman he had just married and for the first time felt that he didn't really know her. The mask of kindness and understanding she had worn throughout their courtship had slipped for a few seconds, revealing something very different underneath. While the party continued around him, with the guests gradually returning to their conversations and laughter, Richard remained quiet, watching through the window as Isabella's small figure disappeared into the distance. Something fundamental had changed at that moment, although he did not yet know exactly what. That night, while Vivian slept satisfied beside him after what she considered to have been a perfect wedding, Richard stayed awake until dawn, thinking about the expression of hunger in the eyes of a 6-year-old girl and wondering what kind of man he was becoming. 3 days after the wedding, Richard couldn't get Isabella out of his head. During meetings at the factory, his mind wandered constantly to those hungry and desperate eyes. Vivian had resumed her routine as if nothing had happened, talking excitedly about the honeymoon they would take next month and about how to reorganize the decoration of the house. "You don't even seem like a newlywed," she commented during breakfast, watching her husband stir his food distractedly. "Ever since the wedding, you've been acting strange." "I'm fine," Richard replied automatically, but his voice sounded distant. "I hope you're not thinking about that dirty girl who showed up at our party. I've completely forgotten about that unpleasant episode." The ease with which Vivian dismissed the suffering of a child made something constrict in Richard's chest. He raised his eyes to face her, looking for some sign of compassion, but found only indifference. That afternoon, Richard made up an excuse to leave the factory early and drove to the neighborhood where he figured Isabella had come from. The paved streets gave way to dirt roads. The brick houses gave way to precarious constructions of wood and corrugated iron. The contrast with his comfortable life was stark. He discreetly asked some residents about a girl named Isabella, until a lady pointed to a small house at the end of the street, almost falling apart. The wooden structure was visibly deteriorated, with loose boards and windows without glass, covered only by pieces of plastic. Richard parked at a distance and watched. Through the crack of a window, he saw an elderly woman, bent over by the weight of the years, trying to fix an old pan. Constance Santos, 72, had raised Isabella since she was a baby when the girl's parents departed this world in an accident. Her grey hair was tied in a simple bun, and her hands, marked by hard work, trembled slightly as she handled the utensils. "Grandma, my tummy hurts," Richard heard Isabella's weak voice coming from inside the house. "Hold on a little longer, my dear. Tomorrow Grandma will get something for us to eat," replied Constance, her voice laden with a deep sadness that she was trying to hide from her granddaughter. Richard felt his heart ache. Constance worked as a collector of recyclable materials, pulling a cart through the streets of the city every day. But health problems, severe arthritis in her hands, and uncontrolled high blood pressure had made each day of work a torture. There were weeks when she could barely leave the house, and in those periods she and Isabella simply did not eat. Returning home, Richard found Vivian arranging purchases scattered around the room. Expensive clothes, imported shoes, beauty products that cost more than the minimum wage. "I bought a few things for our new married life," she said, showing off a bag that Richard knew cost the equivalent of 3 months' rent for a simple house. "Did you need all this?" he asked, observing the absurd amount of luxury items. "Richard, we are a successful couple now. We need to maintain our social standing," she replied, as if it were obvious. That night, when Vivian fell asleep, Richard quietly went to the kitchen. He filled 2 bags with rice, beans, pasta, oil, sugar, and some canned goods. He added fruits, bread, and powdered milk. He left the house in the early hours of the morning and drove to Isabella's neighborhood. He cautiously walked to the door of the small house and left the bags there, knocking lightly before hiding behind a nearby tree. He heard shuffling footsteps approaching the door, followed by a muffled gasp of surprise. "Isabella! Isabella, come see!" called Constance, her voice trembling with emotion. The girl appeared at the door, still in her nightgown, rubbing her sleepy eyes. When she saw the bags, her eyes widened with astonishment and joy. "Grandma, where did all this come from?" she asked, starting to jump from one foot to the other. "It must have been an angel, my dear," replied Constance, tears streaming down her wrinkled cheeks. "An angel who heard our prayers." Richard watched the scene hidden, feeling an emotion that he had not experienced in a long time. Seeing Isabella's pure joy at discovering that she would have food brought him a satisfaction that no business achievement had provided. During the following days, he established a routine. Every 3 days, he left supplies at the door of Constance and Isabella's house, always in the early hours of the morning, always making sure not to be seen. He made up excuses to leave home early or arrive late, discreetly circumventing Vivian's constant surveillance. But Vivian began to notice her husband's mysterious absences. "You've been acting very strange lately," she commented during a dinner at an expensive restaurant. "Always leaving early, arriving late, distracted. Is something going on at the factory?" "Normal work problems," lied Richard, avoiding his wife's penetrating gaze. "Richard, we are married now. There can be no secrets between us," she said, touching his hand over the table. "If there's something bothering you, you have to tell me." For a moment, Richard considered telling her about Isabella and Constance. Maybe Vivian would understand. Maybe that coldness in the marriage had been just nervousness. Maybe the generous and understanding woman he had known during their courtship still existed. "Actually, there's something I want to show you," he said, making an impulsive decision. The next day, he took Vivian to see the neighborhood where Isabella lived. As they moved away from the city center, Vivian's face became increasingly closed off. "Where are you taking me, Richard? This place is dangerous," she murmured, observing the simple houses with evident disdain. "I want you to meet some people," he replied, parking near Constance's house. They walked along the dirt road, and Richard pointed discreetly to the small house where the girl lived. At that moment, Constance was in the yard, hanging some clothes on an improvised clothesline, and Isabella was playing in the dirt with some sticks, creating imaginary drawings. "This is where the girl from our wedding lives," said Richard softly. "She and her grandmother are starving, Vivian. Whole days without food." Vivian watched the scene for a few seconds, her face a mask of poorly disguised disgust. "And what does that have to do with us?" she asked coldly. "We can help them. We can make a difference in their lives." "Richard, have you gone crazy?" She turned to face him, her eyes flashing with irritation. "We are not going to mess with these people. Let them fend for themselves." "These people?" repeated Richard, incredulous. "We're talking about a starving child. We're talking about people who are not our responsibility. If we start helping one, soon all this," she gestured with disdain towards the houses around, "this poverty will want something from us." Richard remained silent all the way back, processing the casual cruelty in Vivian's words. The woman he had married had just shown her true face, and he didn't like what he saw at all. That night, when he arrived home after leaving more supplies for Constance and Isabella, he found Vivian waiting for him with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We need to talk about your mysterious outings," she said, and there was something dangerous in her voice. Richard felt the blood run cold in his veins as he saw the expression on Vivian's face. She was sitting in the armchair in the living room, her legs crossed elegantly, but there was something predatory in her posture that he had never noticed before. "Talk about what?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "About where you've been going all these early mornings, about what you've been doing with our money," she said, rising slowly. "Did you think I wouldn't notice, Richard?" Richard's heart pounded. He had been as discreet as possible, but apparently not enough. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you do." Vivian walked toward him, her high heels echoing on the marble floor. "You're spending our money on that dirty little girl and her good-for-nothing grandma." The words good-for-nothing hit Richard like a slap. "How did you find out?" "I had you followed," she said with a cold smile. "You really thought I was going to let my husband go out at dawn without knowing where he was going?" Richard felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath his feet. "You followed me? I hired someone to do it. And I discovered your little Good Samaritan game." She picked up a folder from the coffee table and threw some photos at him. Very touching, really. The images showed Richard leaving the bags of food at Constance's door, entering the supermarket, carrying groceries to the car. His every move had been documented. "This stops now, Richard. Immediately," said Vivian, her voice as sharp as a knife. "I'm not going to stop," he replied, surprised at the firmness of his own voice. "Yes, you will, because if you don't stop, I'm going to go there and tell that old woman that you are a married man who is taking advantage of their situation. I'll make up that you are trying something inappropriate with the girl." Richard was speechless for a few seconds, trying to process the malice in his wife's words. "You wouldn't do that." "You underestimate me if you think I wouldn't." She moved closer, her eyes gleaming with a cruelty that terrified him. "I'm capable of much worse to protect our reputation." "Our reputation? Do you think I can let my husband be seen as a fool who gives money to any beggar? What will people think of us?" Richard watched the woman in front of him and realized that he had never really known her. During 2 years of dating, she had played a role, showing only what he wanted to see. The real Vivian was someone he would never have approached. "If you go near them," he began. "You what?" She laughed with disdain. "Are you going to hit me? Are you going to leave me? Let's see how your precious little creatures fare when I spread throughout the city that you are stalking a vulnerable family." At that moment, Richard understood that he had married a stranger. Worse, someone capable of using the suffering of others as a weapon. The next morning, Vivian left early, claiming to have appointments at the clinic, but Richard suspected that she was plotting something. He decided to go check if Constance and Isabella were okay, arriving in the neighborhood around 10 o'clock. He found them sitting on the doorstep, sharing a small piece of bread that seemed to be all they had to eat. Constance was visibly weaker than last time, her breathing labored and her hands trembling more than normal. "Good morning," he said, approaching carefully. Constance looked up, and recognition shone in her tired face. "You're that gentleman from the wedding, aren't you? The one who gave food to my Isabella." Richard nodded, surprised that she had recognized him. "How are you doing?" "We're fine, thank you," Constance lied, but it was obvious that they were not. The girl was even thinner, and there was a sickly pallor on her little face. "Can I talk to you in private?" asked Richard. Constance asked Isabella to play in the yard and led Richard inside the small house. The interior was even more precarious than it seemed from the outside. Old and broken furniture, a stove that barely worked, a thin mattress on the floor that served as a bed for both of them. "I know that it is you who has been leaving food for us," said Constance directly. "I saw you from the window one night." Richard was silent, not knowing how to respond. "You don't have to be ashamed, young man. You saved our lives. We were going days without eating anything," she continued, tears shining in her tired eyes. "I just want to know why. Why are you helping two strangers?" "Because I know what it's like to go hungry," Richard replied simply. "And because you shouldn't be going through this." Constance nodded, wiping her eyes with the sleeve of her torn blouse. "Isabella keeps asking who is the angel that sends food. She thinks it's some saint." "Maybe it's better for her to keep believing that," said Richard. "Do you have family? Children?" "I'm married, but we don't have children." "Does your wife know that you help us?" Richard hesitated before answering. She doesn't agree." Constance made an expression of understanding. "I understand. Not everyone can see the suffering of others." At that moment, Isabella ran into the house, holding something in her small hands. "Grandma, look what I found." She showed a withered yellow flower that she had found in the yard. "It's pretty, isn't it?" "Very pretty, my dear," said Constance, accepting the flower as if it were a treasure. Isabella then noticed Richard and watched him for a few seconds with her big, curious eyes. "I know you," she said. "You're the nice man from the wedding." "Isabella, don't bother the gentleman," Constance gently reprimanded. "It's okay," said Richard, crouching down to be at the girl's height. "How are you, Isabella?" "I'm fine. I'm drawing birds in the dirt in the yard. Do you want to see?" Richard followed her to the yard, where she had made several drawings using sticks in the dirt. They were simple figures, but they clearly represented birds flying. "Why birds?" he asked. "Because they can fly wherever they want," she replied with the innocent wisdom of children. "If I could fly, I would take Grandma to a place where there was always food." The girl's words hit Richard with unexpected force. That 6-year-old child dreamed not of toys or sweets, but of food for her and her grandmother. When he said goodbye and returned home, he found Vivian arranging the purchases she had made. More expensive clothes, more superfluous objects that cost the equivalent of what an entire family would spend in months. "I bought a beautiful dress for the dinner on Friday at the Davidsons' house," she said cheerfully. "It cost a fortune, but it's worth every penny." Richard observed the number of bags scattered around the room and thought of Isabella sharing a piece of stale bread with her grandmother. The contrast was so stark that it was obscene. "Vivian, we need to talk about our spending," he said. "What about our spending? We earn well, we can afford the luxury, we can help people who need it." Vivian's face closed immediately. "We've already talked about this, Richard. We're not going to mess with those people. Those people have names, Constance and Isabella. I don't care what they're called, and if I find out that you went back there, I'll keep my promise." That night, Richard stayed up late, watching Vivian sleep peacefully beside him. How had he been so wrong? How had he not realized that the woman he had married was capable of such coldness? At 3 in the morning, he made a decision. He got up silently, prepared a new bag with groceries, and drove again to Constance and Isabella's house. No matter Vivian's threats, he couldn't live with himself knowing that those two were starving while he slept in a comfortable bed. As he left the bag at the door and walked away, he didn't realize that a car was watching him from a distance, with someone documenting his every move. Vivian had kept her word. She was indeed watching his every step. And this time, she didn't intend to just threaten. A week later, Richard arrived home after a particularly difficult day at the factory to find Vivian sitting at the kitchen table with a pile of bank statements spread out in front of her. Her face was serious, and there was a tension in the air that he immediately recognized as dangerous. "Sit here, Richard. We need to talk about something very serious," she said, pointing to the chair in front of him. "What is it now?" he asked, tired of the constant confrontations that had become routine in their marriage. "This," she pushed the statements towards him. "Can you explain these transactions in our account?" Richard examined the papers and felt his stomach clench. Every trip to the supermarket to buy groceries for Constance and Isabella was there, documented in cold numbers. The dates, the amounts, the locations of the purchases, everything was recorded. "You've been spying on me, even financially?" he asked, incredulous. "I have the right to know where our family's money is going," she replied coldly. "And I discovered something very interesting." Vivian took another paper from inside a folder. "I calculated how much you spent on those two in the last 15 days. Do you want to know the amount?" Richard remained silent, but he knew she was going to tell him anyway. $1,200, Richard. $1,200 that came out of our account to support two strangers. Her voice rose in tone with each word. "Meanwhile, I had to cancel the reservation at the French restaurant because you said we needed to save money. $1,200 won't make us poor, Vivian. It's not about the money." She slammed her hand on the table forcefully. "It's about what it represents. You are prioritizing two strangers over your own wife. I'm prioritizing two people who are starving over superfluous expenses." "Superfluous expenses?" She laughed with disdain. "Maintaining our social standing are superfluous expenses. A $5,000 purse is a superfluous expense, yes." Vivian stood up abruptly, her eyes flashing with anger. "So that's how you see me, as a frivolous spendthrift? You're the one showing yourself that way." The silence that followed was charged with hostility. Vivian stared at him for long seconds before speaking again, this time with a calm that was even more terrifying than anger. "Very well, Richard. You want to choose between them and me. Then choose. But know that if you continue with this charade, I'm going to make your life a living hell." "What kind of hell?" "You're going to find out." She picked up the statements and left the kitchen, leaving Richard alone with his troubled thoughts. The next morning, Richard decided that he needed to talk to Constance in person. He couldn't just keep leaving groceries. He needed to explain the situation before Vivian carried out her threats. He arrived at their house around 9 o'clock and found a scene that alarmed him deeply. Constance was sitting on the ground in the yard, panting and with her face extremely pale, while Isabella cried beside her. "Constance!" He ran to them. "What happened?" "Grandma fainted," Isabella sobbed. "She was trying to get water from the well and fell." Richard knelt beside Constance, who was trying to catch her breath. Her hands trembled violently, and there was a cold sweat on her forehead. "I'm fine, young man," she murmured weakly. "I just got a little dizzy." "You're not okay," said Richard firmly. "You need to see a doctor now." "I don't have money for a doctor," she replied, trying to get up and failing. "I'll take you. My car is here." Constance looked at him with gratitude, but also with concern. "I don't want to be a bother." "It's not a bother. It's an obligation." Richard helped Constance to her feet and took her to the car, with Isabella following alongside, still crying softly. During the drive to the small public hospital in town, Constance told him about her health problems. "I have high blood pressure and diabetes," she explained with difficulty, "but the medicines are very expensive. Sometimes I go weeks without taking them." "Weeks without medication?" "That's just how it is, young man. When I have to choose between medicine and food for Isabella, I always choose food." Richard felt a wave of revolt and sadness. While Vivian spent thousands on trivialities, Constance was literally risking her life for lack of money for basic medicines. At the hospital, The doctor confirmed what Richard already suspected. Constance was in an advanced pre-diabetic state and with dangerously high blood pressure due to the lack of proper medication. She needs regular medical follow-up and continuous medication, the doctor explained to Richard, as if he were family. If she continues like this, she could have serious complications. And how much does the treatment cost? The basic medications are around $300 a month, not to mention the consultations and exams. $300, less than half of what Vivian spent on a single pair of shoes. I'll take care of the costs, said Richard without hesitation. Constance, who was listening to the conversation from the stretcher, held his hand tightly. Young man, I can't accept that. You already help too much with the food. You're going to accept it, yes, because Isabella needs you well. Tears streamed down the elderly woman's face. Why do you do this for us? You don't even know as well, because it's the right thing to do. When they returned home, Richard helped Constance get settled and organized all the medications he had bought at the hospital pharmacy. Isabella watched everything with her big eyes, processing what had happened. Is the nice man going to make Grandma better? She asked. I'm going to do everything I can, Richard promised. Thank you, nice man, said Isabella, hugging his legs tightly. When Richard arrived home that afternoon, he found Vivian waiting for him with an expression that mixed triumph and malice. Where have you been? She asked, but it was obvious that she already knew the answer. At the hospital with Constance. She was feeling sick. Oh, how convenient. Now you're a doctor too? Vivian, the woman was sick. She needed help. And you decided to play the hero once again. She approached him, her eyes shining with a dangerous light. I have news for you, my dear husband. What news? I called some of our acquaintances today. I told them about your secret activities. Richard's blood ran cold. What did you tell them? The truth, that my husband has been going out at dawn to meet with a vulnerable family, that he is spending our money on them, that he spends hours at their house. You made it sound as if what, Richard? She smiled coldly. People draw their own conclusions. And you know what's interesting? Everyone was very worried about me, a young and beautiful wife, married to a man who has been behaving strangely. Richard immediately understood the trap. Vivian had planted seeds of doubt about his character, making him seem like someone with dubious intentions towards a vulnerable family. You're diabolical, he muttered. I'm practical, she replied. And now you're going to stop this nonsense, or I'll spread an even more interesting version of the story. What version? The version where you're taking advantage of their desperate situation, where you're blackmailing a sick old woman and a starving child. Believe me, I can be very creative. Richard watched the woman he had married and felt a mixture of disgust and disbelief. How had he been so blind? How had he not seen the malice that hid behind that perfect smile? If you do that, you'll destroy two innocent people. I'll destroy you, she corrected. They are just collateral damage. That night, Richard barely slept. Vivian had demonstrated that she was capable of anything to get what she wanted. And he was beginning to realize that he had severely underestimated the extent of her cruelty. On the other side of town, Constance helped Isabella get ready for bed on the mattress they shared, grateful for the food in their bellies and the medications that could save her grandmother's life. Grandma, do you think the nice man is a real angel? Asked Isabella, snuggling against her grandmother. I think he's better than an angel, my dear, replied Constance, stroking her granddaughter's hair. He is a good-hearted human being. They did not know that the kindness of that man was about to cost him much more than they imagined. 2 weeks later, the effects of Vivian's malicious campaign began to manifest themselves in a devastating way. Richard arrived at the factory on a Monday to find his administrative manager, Carl Mendez, waiting for him with a worried expression. Richard, we need to talk urgently, said Carl, closing the office door behind him. What happened? Paraguasu Furniture cancelled the contract. They claimed incompatibility of corporate values. Carl handed him the official letter. It's the third important client we've lost this week. Richard read the letter with growing apprehension. Paraguasu Furniture accounted for almost 20% of the company's annual revenue. Losing contracts of this size in sequence was a devastating blow. Did they give any specific explanation? He asked. Nothing official. But I heard some comments in the hallways around town. Carl hesitated before continuing. They are saying that you are involved in questionable situations. Richard's blood ran cold. What kind of situations? They say you are spending company money on dubious activities. That your wife is worried about your behavior. Richard immediately realized what was happening. Vivian had spread a distorted version of the truth, mixing half-truths with malicious insinuations. The result was devastating to his professional reputation. Carl, you've known me for 8 years. Do you believe these stories? Of course not, Richard. But what I believe doesn't matter if clients are cancelling contracts. That same day, 3 employees resigned, claiming better opportunities elsewhere. But Richard knew that the real reason was the fear of associating with someone with a tainted reputation. Upon arriving home, he found Vivian doing her nails on the sofa, watching television with an expression of satisfaction that disgusted him. "How was your day, honey?" she asked with false sweetness. "You know exactly how it was," he replied, throwing the folder on the table forcefully. 3 cancelled contracts and 3 employees fired. What a shame. Business is tough these days. She examined her nails as if they were the most important thing in the world. "Stop this charade, Vivian. I know it was you." "Me?" She feigned surprise. "I just told some friends that I was worried about you. People draw their own conclusions. You destroyed my reputation. I protected our family." She stood up, walking towards him. "If you had stopped when I asked, none of this would have happened." Richard stared at her for long seconds, seeing for the first time the true extent of his wife's malice. "The man you married never existed. You fell in love with my money and my social standing. And you fell in love with a facade that I maintained for 2 years. She smiled coldly. "At least we're honest now." That night, Richard left home late and drove to Constance and Isabella's neighborhood. He needed to check if they were okay, but he also needed to think about how to proceed. His financial assistance was now compromised by the crisis in the company. He found Constance sitting on the doorstep, watching Isabella play in the yard with some sticks. The medication was taking effect. She seemed stronger and more alert than in recent weeks. "Good evening, Constance," he greeted. "Young man, it's good to see you." She stood up, immediately noticing the worried expression on his face. "Did something happen? Can I talk to you?" They sat down in 2 old chairs in the yard, while Isabella continued playing a few feet away, humming softly a song she had invented. "I'm going through some difficulties," began Richard. "My company is facing problems, and I may not be able to continue helping as before." Constance nodded understandingly. "You've already done more for us than anyone would. Don't feel obligated to anything. But you need the medication. Young man, before you appeared, we lived without medicine for years. If we go back to living like that, at least now we know that there are good people in the world." The resignation in Constance's voice broke Richard's heart. That woman had accepted suffering as something natural, expected. It made him feel even more determined not to give up. "There's something else," he said, hesitating. "My wife. She doesn't agree with the help I give you. She may try to cause problems." Constance was silent for a moment, processing the information. "Do you want us to stop accepting your help?" "No, I want you to know that if someone comes here asking questions or spreading lies about me, it's not true." "What kind of lies?" Richard took a deep breath. "She may try to make it seem like my intentions are not good, that I'm taking advantage of your situation." Constance's face hardened. "Anyone who knows you would know that that's a lie. Not everyone knows me like you do. Then I'm going to tell anyone who wants to listen what kind of man you are, she said with determination. A man who saved our lives without asking for anything in return. At that moment, Isabella approached them holding a small yellow flower that she had found. "Mr. Thompson," she ran to him, handing him the flower. "I found this for you." "Thank you, Isabella," he said, accepting the flower with emotion. "Are you sad today?" asked the girl, watching him with her big, perceptive eyes. "A little," he admitted. "When I'm sad, Grandma tells me stories. Do you want me to tell you a story?" Richard smiled for the first time in days. "I do." Isabella sat down beside him and began to tell a story about a bird that helped other animals in the forest, a simple but kind-hearted narrative that she had created in her child's imagination. While listening to Isabella's sweet voice, Richard thought about the irony of the situation. A 6-year-old girl who had nothing but her own purity was comforting an adult who owned a thriving factory, but whose personal life was falling apart. When he said goodbye and returned home, he found Vivian on the phone, talking animatedly with someone. "Of course I'm worried. Any wife would be," she was saying. "A married, successful man, spending time and money with a family he barely knows. It's strange, to say the least." She noticed Richard standing in the doorway and ended the call quickly. "Who were you talking to?" he asked. "With Marina Paraguasu. She called to see how I was," replied Vivian calmly. Marina Paraguasu, wife of the owner of Paraguasu Furniture, the client who had cancelled the contract that morning. Richard realized that Vivian was systematically contacting the wives of his main clients, spreading poison about his reputation. "You're not going to stop, are you?" he asked. "I'll stop when you stop," she replied. "It's that simple. And if I don't stop, then you'll find out how far I can go to protect our family." That night, Richard made a decision that would change everything. If Vivian wanted war, he would not back down. But he also knew that he needed to be smarter than her. He began to document every lie she spread, every person she contacted, every move in her campaign of destruction. If she wanted to play dirty, he would at least make sure he had evidence of the truth. But what Richard did not know was that Vivian was also documenting his every move, preparing a final blow that would be much more devastating than he imagined. The silent war between them was just beginning, and Constance and Isabella, unknowingly, were at the center of a battle that could destroy everything. A week later, Richard's situation had deteriorated even further. In the morning, he arrived at the factory to find 2 delivery trucks parked in the yard, but the drivers refused to unload the goods. "What's the problem?" he asked the head of the delivery men. "Orders from headquarters," replied the man, avoiding eye contact. "They said there's a problem with the company's payment." "What problem? Our account is up to date." "I don't know the details, sir. We just follow orders." Richard ran to his office and immediately called the supplier. After 20 minutes of waiting, he managed to speak to the sales manager. "Mr. Thompson, we have received worrying information about the financial situation of your company," explained the manager. "Several people have contacted us, alerting us to irregularities." "What people? What irregularities?" "I can't give details, but there have been reports of suspicious expenses and irresponsible management of resources. We need to reassess our partnership." Richard hung up the phone with his hands trembling with anger. Vivian had expanded her campaign, now contacting suppliers in addition to clients. She was systematically destroying all the pillars of his business. Carl entered the office with a pile of papers. "Richard, we have more problems. The bank is questioning our credit limit." "The bank?" "They said they received information about inappropriate use of company resources for personal purposes." Vivian's strategy was proving to be even more sophisticated than Richard had imagined. She wasn't just spreading rumors, she was creating a network of false information that seemed to corroborate her accusations. "Carl, I need you to do something for me," said Richard. "I want you to document all our expenses for the last 6 months. every penny that came out of the company account. What for? To prove that there's nothing irregular. Every dollar was spent legitimately on the company. That afternoon, Richard decided to confront Vivian about the escalation of her campaign. He arrived home earlier and found her in the kitchen, preparing a luxurious snack with expensive ingredients. "We need to talk," he said, his voice controlled but firm. "About what?" she asked without looking up from the plate. "About you sabotaging my company. Now you're involving suppliers and banks." "I didn't sabotage anything," she replied calmly. "I just expressed my legitimate concerns as a wife." "Legitimate concerns?" "A husband who spends company money on strangers, who goes out at dawn for secret meetings, who is visibly changed. Any wife would worry." Richard realized how cleverly she twisted the facts. Each truth was wrapped in lies until it became unrecognizable. "Vivian, you're going to destroy everything I built. You're the one destroying it." She finally faced him. "I'm trying to save our family." Richard stared at her for long seconds, seeing for the first time the true extent of his wife's malice. "Our family? You don't even know what family means." "Yes, I do. Family is you, me, and our interests. Not two strangers who appeared out of nowhere. Constance and Isabella have names. They are people. They are a dead weight that you refuse to drop." The coldness in Vivian's words hit Richard like a slap. "Dead weight? We're talking about a starving child and a sick old woman. We're talking about people who are not our responsibility." At that moment, Richard's phone rang. It was a number he did not recognize. "Hello? Mr. Thompson? This is Maria, Constance's neighbor." The voice on the other end sounded distressed. "You need to come here urgently." "What happened?" "Constance is very ill, and there are strange people asking questions about you." Richard felt his blood run cold. "What kind of questions?" "Asking if you do inappropriate things with the girl, saying that someone denounced you." Richard looked at Vivian, who watched the conversation with a poorly disguised expression of satisfaction. "I'm going there now," he said, hanging up the phone. "Where are you going?" asked Vivian. "To fix the mess you made." "I didn't make any mess. I just fulfilled my obligation as a citizen." "Your obligation as a citizen? When there are suspicions about the behavior of an adult with a vulnerable child, it is everyone's duty to report it." Richard was speechless for a few seconds, trying to process the malice of what Vivian had done. "You reported. You made them think that I reported facts. A married man who spends excessive time and money with a vulnerable family, who visits a child regularly, who lied to his own wife about these activities. You know that's not true. I know it looks suspicious, and appearances matter." Richard ran to the car, his mind a confusion of anger and despair. During the journey, he thought about how to explain the situation to Constance without destroying the trust she had in him. When he arrived in the neighborhood, he found a small group of neighbors talking in front of Constance's house. Everyone stopped talking when they saw him approaching, some watching him with obvious distrust. "Mr. Thompson," Maria came to him. "What a difficult situation this is. Where is Constance?" "Inside the house with the girl. She is very shaken up." Richard approached the door and knocked gently. "Constance, it's me, Richard." The door opened slowly, revealing Constance with her face swollen from crying. Isabella was clinging to her skirt, her eyes red and frightened. "Young man," said Constance with a choked voice, "what a terrible thing they are saying about you." "I know, and I want you to know that none of it is true." "I know it's not," she replied immediately, "but people came here asking terrible questions. They said that you might be taking advantage of us." "Who came to ask questions?" "An elegant woman. She said she was an acquaintance of yours and that she was worried about us, but the questions she asked—" Constance shook her head. "They were malicious questions." Richard clenched his fists. Vivian had come in person to plant poison in the minds of Constance and the neighbors. "What else did she say?" "That you may not be who you seem." That rich men sometimes take advantage of poor families, that she was especially worried about Isabella. Richard knelt down to be at the height of Isabella, who watched him with confused and frightened eyes. "Isabella, are you afraid of me?" he asked softly. The girl shook her head vigorously. "No, Mr. Thompson, you are good." "Then don't worry about what people are saying, okay? Why are they saying bad things about you?" Richard looked at Constance before answering. "Because sometimes bad people invent lies about good people." "Like in the movies?" asked Isabella. "Exactly like in the movies." Constance served Richard a weak coffee, and they talked for an hour about the situation. She said that some neighbors had started to look at her strangely, making comments about being dangerous to accept help from strangers. "Constance, if you prefer that I stop coming here," began Richard. "Don't even think about it," she interrupted him firmly. "You saved our lives. I'm not going to let malicious tongues separate us." When Richard returned home that night, he found Vivian watching television calmly, as if nothing had happened. "How did things go with your friends?" she asked without taking her eyes off the screen. "You are a monster," he said. "I am a wife who protects her family," she replied calmly. "And now you are going to choose. Either you stop this obsession, or I escalate things even further. There is nothing more you can do." Vivian finally turned to look at him, a cruel smile playing on her lips. "You really believe that? Honey, I've barely started." That night, Richard realized that he had completely underestimated the depth of his wife's malice, and the worst thing was that she was just warming up. The next morning, Richard woke up to the sound of loud voices coming from the gate of his house. Still in his pajamas, he went to the window and saw 3 people talking animatedly on the sidewalk, pointing at his residence. He recognized one of them as Sonia, one of the biggest gossips in town. He dressed quickly and left for work, but as he passed the group, he heard fragments of the conversation that made his blood run cold. "I always thought he was strange. Vivian, poor thing, must be suffering. A little child. Just imagine." On the way to the factory, he stopped at the traffic light and saw 2 acquaintances from the local business association talking on the sidewalk. When they greeted him, it was with a cold nod and looks of distrust that he had never received before. At the factory, the situation was even worse. Carl was waiting for him with a somber expression. "Richard, we have serious problems," he said, closing the office door. 3 more clients cancelled contracts this morning." "Which ones?" "Santos Lumber, Silver Carpentry, and the Well-Being Store Chain." Richard sat heavily in the chair. These were old clients, some who had worked with him for over 5 years. "And there's more," continued Carl hesitantly. "The employees are agitated. There are rumors circulating." "What kind of rumors?" "About you." "About inappropriate situations. The staff is worried about working here. Do you believe these rumors?" "Of course not. But productivity has dropped drastically. Half of the staff is distracted talking about the subject." Richard ran his hand over his face, feeling the weight of the systematic destruction that Vivian was causing. "Carl, I want you to know the truth. Everything they're saying are lies spread by my wife." "Your wife?" Carl widened his eyes. "She wants me to stop helping a needy family. Since I refused, she decided to destroy my reputation." Carl was silent for a few moments, processing the information. "Richard, this is very serious." "I know, and I don't know how to stop it. Maybe it's time to see a lawyer." That afternoon, Richard decided to face the situation head-on. He drove to the city centre and began looking for the people he knew were spreading the rumors. He found Sonia in the central square talking to a group of women. "Sonia, can I talk to you?" he interrupted politely. The women stopped talking and looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. "Sure, Richard," said Sonia, but her tone was cold. "I would like to clarify some misunderstandings that are circulating about me." "What misunderstandings?" "You know what I'm talking about. Stories about my character, about my conduct." Sonia exchanged glances with the other women. Richard, we are not the ones who invent these stories. We just comment on what we hear. And what exactly did you hear? That you are having behaviors. Questionable. Your own wife is worried. My wife is lying, said Richard directly. The silence that followed was awkward. Sonia and the other women watched him as if he had lost his mind. Richard, said Sonia slowly, why would a wife lie about her own husband? It was a question for which Richard did not have an answer that seemed reasonable. How to explain that Vivian was capable of such malice just to get what she wanted? Because she doesn't agree with the help I give to a needy family, he tried to explain. What kind of help? Asked one of the women. Food, medicine, for a sick old woman and her granddaughter. The women exchanged significant glances. And why would that bother your wife? Insisted Sonia. Richard realized that he was in a trap. Any explanation he gave would make Vivian seem reasonable and him seem obsessive. Forget what I said, he murmured, moving away from the group. As he walked through the square, he heard whispers and comments behind him. His attempt to defend himself had only worsened the situation. That afternoon he decided to visit Constance and Isabella, but when he arrived in the neighborhood, he noticed that something was different. There were fewer people on the streets, and those who were around watched him openly. When he knocked on the door of Constance's house, it took longer than usual for her to answer. When she finally opened it, her face was marked by worry. "Young man, it's good that you came," she said, but there was tension in her voice. "Did something happen? Come in, please." Inside the house, Constance told him that more people had appeared asking questions. This time they were neighbors from the neighborhood itself, people she had known for years. "They're saying that it may be dangerous for Isabella to have you around," she explained with difficulty. "And you, what do you think? I know what kind of man you are, but—" She hesitated. But Isabella is just a child. If there is any risk, even if it's just a rumor." Richard felt his world crumble. Constance was considering keeping him away as a precaution. "Constance, do you really believe that I would harm Isabella?" "No, young man. But I am responsible for her. If something happened, where is Isabella? In the yard, but maybe it's better if you don't." "I understand," said Richard, standing up. "I'll leave. Young man, it's not that I don't trust you." "I understand," he repeated, heading for the door. Before leaving, he heard Isabella's voice coming from the yard. "Grandma, did Mr. Thompson come to visit us?" "No, my dear, he had to leave. But he didn't even say goodbye to me." Richard stopped at the door, feeling his heart break. He was losing not only his reputation and his business, but also the trust of the only people he had genuinely tried to help. When he arrived home, he found Vivian organizing some clothes in the closet, humming happily. "How was your day, honey?" she asked without looking at him. "You did it," he said simply. "Did what?" "Destroy everything. My company, my reputation, even the trust of Constance and Isabella." Vivian stopped organizing the clothes and turned to him with a smile of satisfaction. "Finally admit you lost? What do you want, Vivian? For me to stop helping them? I want you to be the husband I need, rich, respected, focused on our family." "Our family," he repeated bitterly. "Yes, you, me, and the children we are going to have, not two strangers who appeared out of nowhere. And if I agree, if I stop completely, then we start rebuilding what you destroyed. I'll talk to people, explain that you recognize the error, that you are seeking help. In 6 months, everything returns to normal. And them, Constance and Isabella, they are no longer our problem." Richard watched his wife for long moments. She was offering him a way out, a chance to recover everything he had lost. But the price was abandoning 2 people who depended on him. "I need to think," he said. "Don't take too long," replied Vivian, "because if you don't accept my proposal, I can make things even worse." "Worse how?" "I can make it so you never work in this town again. I can make it so no one believes a word you say. I can turn you into the pariah of Oakwood." That night, Richard couldn't sleep. Lying next to the woman who had revealed herself to be his enemy, he thought about Isabella, asking why he hadn't said goodbye. For the first time since everything had started, he seriously considered giving up. Maybe Vivian was right. Maybe he couldn't save everyone. But then he remembered Isabella's hungry eyes on the wedding day, Constance's gratitude when she received the first supplies, the yellow flower that the girl had given him. Some battles were worth fighting, even if they cost everything. 3 days after Vivian's ultimatum, Richard woke up to an urgent call from Carl. "Richard, you need to come to the factory now." The manager's voice sounded desperate. Something terrible happened. What was it? The employees. "They are staging a strike. They say they don't want to work here anymore." Richard dressed quickly and ran to the factory. Upon arriving, he found all of his employees gathered in the main yard. There were 32 workers he had known for years, people he trusted and who had always respected him. John Peterson, the company's oldest employee, stepped forward to speak to him. Richard had known him for 8 years, an upright man, a family man who had always called him boss with genuine respect. "Mr. Thompson," said John, visibly embarrassed, "we need to talk to you." "I'm listening, John." "It's about these stories that are running around town, about you and, well, about inappropriate situations with a child." "John, you've known me for 8 years. Have I ever given you reason to doubt my character?" "No, boss, never." But then he looked at the other employees, seeking support. "But our wives are worried. They say that if these stories are true, they don't want us to work here. And if they are not true, then it's different. But how do we know?" Richard observed the faces of the men and women who had helped build his business. He saw doubt, worry, but also conflicting respect. "What do you want me to do?" Mary Smith, one of the oldest workers, spoke up. "We want you to tell us the truth, the whole truth." Richard took a deep breath. It was his chance to clarify everything, but he knew that the truth sounded as unlikely as the lies. "The truth is that my wife is lying about me because she wants me to stop helping a needy family." The silence that followed was heavy. The employees exchanged looks of disbelief. "Boss," said John carefully, "why would a wife lie about her own husband?" "Because she doesn't agree that I use our money to help a sick old woman and her orphaned granddaughter." "But that doesn't make sense," said Mary. "A woman wouldn't destroy her own husband because of that." Richard realized that he was fighting against a logic that ordinary people could not understand. For them, it was impossible to imagine that a wife was capable of such malice. "I understand that it's hard to believe," he said, "but I ask you to trust me as you always have." "Mr. Thompson," said John, "we want to trust you. But we need something more than words." "What do you want?" "We want to meet this family you help. We want to see with our own eyes what kind of help it is." The suggestion caught Richard by surprise. "You want to go there?" "We want to," said Mary firmly. "If you are telling the truth, there will be no problem in showing us." Richard considered the proposal. Taking 30 employees to Constance and Isabella's neighborhood would be a spectacle, but it might be the only way to prove his innocence. "Okay," he decided. "Let's go now." The caravan of cars and motorcycles that headed to the low-income neighborhood of the city caught the attention of the entire neighborhood. When they arrived at Constance's house, she was in the yard hanging clothes and was terrified to see so many people. "Constance," said Richard, approaching slowly, "these are my employees. They would like to meet you and Isabella." "Young man, what is happening?" she asked, clearly frightened. "People in the city are saying lies about me. My employees want to see for themselves what our relationship is like." Constance looked at the group of people and then at Richard. "Come in," she said simply. What the employees saw inside the small and poor house deeply impacted everyone. The extreme simplicity, the old furniture, the evident scarcity of resources contrasted dramatically with any idea of exploitation or manipulation. Isabella, who was playing in the yard, ran inside when she saw Richard. "Mr. Thompson!" she cried, hugging his legs. "You're back! Grandma said you had gone away forever." The naturalness and genuine joy of the girl upon seeing him was more convincing than any argument that Richard could present. "Who are these people?" asked Isabella, curiously observing the employees. "They are friends of Mr. Thompson," explained Constance. "Hi, friends of Mr. Thompson." Isabella waved cheerfully. Mary Smith knelt down to be at the girl's height. "Hi, sweetie. How did you meet Mr. Thompson?" "He showed up at his wedding when I was hungry. He gave me brownies and then sent food to me and Grandma. And what else does he do when he comes here? He talks to me, tells me stories, brought medicine for Grandma. Sometimes he gets sad, and I tell him stories too." The absolute innocence in Isabella's answers dispelled any doubts that might remain in the employees' minds. John approached Constance. "Ma'am, Mr. Thompson, does he behave appropriately here?" "More than appropriately," replied Constance firmly. "He is a good man. He saved our lives when we were starving. He never asked for anything in return, never behaved inappropriately." "And why would anyone spread lies about him?" Constance sighed. "Because not everyone can accept that there are good people in the world." The employees spent an hour talking to Constance and Isabella, asking questions, observing the interaction between Richard and the family. It became clear to everyone that there was nothing inappropriate or suspicious there. When they left, John addressed Richard with tears in his eyes. "Boss, we apologize. We should have trusted you from the beginning." "You did what you thought was right," replied Richard. "Now you know the truth. And we will make a point of spreading that truth throughout the city," said Mary with determination. "Whoever is doing this to you is very malicious," added John. "Using an innocent child to destroy a good man? That's diabolical." On the way back to the factory, Richard felt a hope that he had not experienced for weeks. He finally had allies, people who knew the truth and could help him rebuild his reputation. But upon arriving home that night, he discovered that Vivian had also acted. "How was your day, honey?" she asked, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Productive," he replied cautiously. "I imagine. I heard you took half the world to visit your protégés. How did you know?" "I have my informants." She moved closer to him. "It was a smart move. Use the child's innocence to convince your employees." "I didn't use anything. I just showed the truth." "The truth," she laughed. "What an interesting concept. Do you know what my truth is, Richard?" "What?" "That you are obsessed with a strange family, to the point of risking our reputation and our financial stability. That this obsession is destroying our marriage." "That's a lie." "It's an interpretation. And do you know what's interesting about interpretations? They can change depending on who tells the story." At that moment, Richard's phone rang. It was Carl. "Richard, something terrible happened. The health department showed up at the factory." "The health department?" "They said they received an anonymous complaint about irregularities. They are demanding a complete inspection." Richard looked at Vivian, who watched the conversation with a poorly disguised expression of satisfaction. "I'm going there now," he said, hanging up the phone. "Trouble at work?" asked Vivian innocently. "You reported my own company." "Me? How can I have done that? I barely understand business matters. Vivian, this could close the factory, only if there are irregularities, and you have always been so careful with those things." Richard understood that he had once again underestimated his wife's destructive capacity. She was not only attacking his personal reputation, she was trying to physically destroy his source of income. "Why are you doing this?" "Because you forced me to. I offered a peaceful way out, but you preferred to escalate the conflict." "Escalate? I just showed my employees the truth. And I am showing the competent authorities what kind of company you really run." That night, while Richard rushed to the factory to deal with the health department inspection, Vivian made several calls to strategic contacts in the city. The war had entered a new phase, and she was determined to win at any cost. The health department inspection lasted 3 days and revealed minor irregularities that any company could have. A fire extinguisher with an expired date, some outdated documentation, nothing that justified a complaint. But the damage was already done. The news that the factory was being investigated spread through the city like wildfire. Carl managed to quickly resolve the issues raised by the inspectors, but the atmosphere in the company was tense. Some older employees began to question whether there was something more serious being hidden. "Boss," said John during a meeting at the factory, "we know that you are honest, but these constant investigations are making everyone nervous." "They are persecutions, John. Someone is trying to destroy our company." "But who would do that?" Richard hesitated before answering. "Someone very close to me." Mary Smith frowned. "Mr. Thompson, are you implying that your own wife—" "I'm not implying anything, I'm stating it." The silence that followed was charged with discomfort. For the employees, it was almost impossible to understand that a wife was capable of destroying her own husband in that way. "But boss," said John hesitantly, "that doesn't make sense. Why would she destroy her own source of income? Because she has other sources of income that I was unaware of." During a discreet investigation that Richard had done on Vivian's finances, he discovered that she had a secret bank account with a considerable amount, money that she had been withdrawing from the couple's joint account over the months, claiming non-existent household expenses. "What do you mean, boss?" "She has been diverting money from our joint account. I found out that in the last 4 months she withdrew almost $50,000, claiming expenses that never happened." $50,000? Mary widened her eyes. "Enough money for her to live comfortably for years while destroying everything I built." That afternoon, Richard decided to confront Vivian about the financial discoveries. He arrived home earlier and found her in the living room, talking on the phone with someone. "Don't worry, everything is under control," she was saying. "In a few more weeks he will be completely broke and will have to accept my conditions." She noticed Richard standing in the doorway and ended the call quickly. "Who were you talking to?" he asked. "With my sister," she lied calmly. "About what?" "Girl stuff you wouldn't understand." Richard approached her, pulling some bank statements from his pocket. "Maybe I understand more than you imagine." Vivian's face paled slightly when she saw the papers. "What is this?" "Statement from your secret account. $50,000 that you diverted from our joint account." "I didn't divert anything. It's my money." "Our money," he corrected. "Money from the joint account that you withdrew claiming false expenses." "Prove they are false." Richard threw another paper on the table. "Here are all the invoices for the last 4 months. There are no expenses that justify those withdrawals." Vivian observed the documents for a few seconds before smiling coldly. "And what are you going to do with this? Report me for using money from my own family? I intend to show everyone what kind of person you really are. Are you going to show that I am a wife who had to protect our financial reserve because my husband was spending our money on strangers?" Richard realized that once again Vivian had found a way to distort the situation in her favor. "You are diabolical. I am intelligent, and you continue to be naive." At that moment, Richard's phone rang. It was Constance, and her voice sounded desperate. "Young man, I need help. Isabella is very ill." "What happened?" "She started having a high fever in the morning, and now she is delirious. I don't have money to take her to a private doctor, and at the public hospital the line is huge." "I'll pick you up now," said Richard immediately. "Where are you going?" asked Vivian. "The girl is sick. I need to take her to the hospital." "Oh, how convenient. Another emergency from your protégés. Vivian, it's a 6-year-old child with a high fever. And what does that have to do with us?" The coldness in Vivian's words hit Richard like a slap. "How can you be so cruel? How can you be so idiotic?" Richard ran to the car and drove to Constance's house. He found the elderly woman in a panic, holding Isabella, who was clearly very sick. Skin hot to the touch, labored breathing, eyes glazed with fever. "Let's go to the hospital now," he said, picking up the girl in his arms. During the journey, Isabella, delirious with fever, murmuring meaningless words. Constance cried softly in the back seat, repeating prayers in a low voice. At the private hospital in town, Richard carried Isabella straight to the emergency room. The doctor on duty, Dr. Fernandez, examined the girl immediately. "She has pneumonia," he diagnosed after some tests. "She needs to be hospitalized for intravenous treatment." "Do everything that is necessary," said Richard. "Are you the father?" "I am. A friend of the family," he replied, realizing how that sounded. Dr. Fernandez made some notes. "You will need the authorization of the legal guardian." "I authorize everything," said Constance immediately. "Are you the grandmother?" "I am. I have taken care of her since her parents departed this world." During the next few hours, Richard remained at the hospital while Isabella received treatment. Constance was exhausted, dozing in the chair next to the bed where her granddaughter rested. It was at this moment that Vivian appeared at the hospital, accompanied by two women whom Richard recognized as wives of important clients. "Richard," she said loudly, making sure to be heard, "I found you. I was worried when you disappeared from home. What are you doing here?" "I came after my husband." She looked at Isabella in the bed and then at Constance. "I see that you are here with them again." The two women accompanying Vivian watched the scene with evident discomfort and curiosity. "The girl is sick, Vivian." "What a shame," she said, without showing a drop of compassion. "But I don't understand why you need to be here. Don't they have other relatives?" "I am the only relative," said Constance, waking up with the voices. "Ah, the grandmother." Vivian addressed her with a fake smile. "How are you, dear?" "Worried about my granddaughter," replied Constance dryly. Of course, but it must be reassuring to know that you have someone like my husband to take care of you." Vivian's tone was laden with malicious insinuations. The two women who accompanied her exchanged significant glances. "Vivian, stop this," murmured Richard. "Stop what? I'm just being polite to my husband's friends." Dr. Fernandez approached the group. "Excuse the interruption, but we need silence in the room. The patient needs rest." "Of course, doctor," said Vivian. "My husband and I were just leaving." "I'm not leaving," said Richard firmly. "Richard, you can't stay here all night. Come home. I'll stay until she's better." "That's ridiculous." "You are not responsible for this child. Someone needs to be," he replied, his patience finally running out. Dr. Fernandez watched the discussion with growing discomfort. "Ladies and gentlemen, please." "Sorry, doctor," said Vivian. "My husband is going through a difficult time. He has been obsessed with this family." "Vivian!" exploded Richard. "What?" "It's the truth. You spend more time here than at home." The two women accompanying Vivian absorbed every word of the discussion, clearly planning to spread everything throughout the city. Dr. Fernandez, realizing the tension, decided to intervene. "Ladies and gentlemen, I will ask that you continue this conversation outside the room. The patient needs peace." Richard looked at Isabella, still unconscious in the bed, and then at Constance, who watched everything with an expression of deep sadness. "Constance," he said softly, "I'll fix this, and I'll be back." "You don't have to, young man," she replied. "You have already done too much for us." "I haven't done enough." Leaving the room, Richard addressed Vivian with a determination she had never seen before. "It's over, Vivian. This war you started ends now." "It ends when you come to your senses," she replied. "No, it ends when I tell everyone who you really are." Vivian's smile became even crueler. "Do it, honey. Let's see who comes out destroyed from this story." The next morning, Richard woke up with a determination he hadn't felt in months. He had spent the night at the hospital next to Isabella, who had finally improved with treatment. Vivian had returned home after the discussion, taking with her her two witnesses who would certainly spread more distorted versions of the situation. Constance was sleeping in the armchair next to her granddaughter's bed when Richard decided it was time to act. He quietly left the room and went to the hospital administration to settle all the costs of Isabella's treatment. It was $8,000 in total, informed the employee of the financial department. Hospitalization, medications, and exams. "It's all paid for," said Richard, handing over his credit card. When he returned to the room, he found Isabella awake, still weak, but with more alert eyes. "Mr. Thompson," she said in a weak voice, "did you stay here with me?" "I did, little one. How are you feeling?" "Better. Grandma said I was very sick." "You were, but now you're going to get better quickly." Constance approached him. "Young man, I don't know how to thank you. If it weren't for you, you don't have to thank me, Constance. I need to. And I also need to apologize." "Apologize?" "For having doubted you when the neighbors started spreading those lies. I should have trusted my heart from the beginning. You were protecting Isabella. You did what any responsible grandmother would do. Even so, I regret it. You are a good man, and I let bad people plant doubts in my head." At that moment, Dr. Fernandez entered the room for the morning examination. "How is our patient today?" he asked, checking Isabella's temperature. "Much better, doctor," replied Constance. "Great. If it continues like this, she can be discharged tomorrow," he addressed Richard. "Sir, can I talk to you in private?" The two went to the hallway. "Mr. Thompson, I need to ask you something," said the doctor hesitantly. "Yesterday there was an awkward situation here. The argument with my wife." "Exactly. She made some insinuations." "Well, disturbing." "What kind of insinuations?" "About your relationship with the child and the family. As a doctor, I have an obligation to report any suspicion of—" "Doctor," interrupted Richard, "I can explain the whole situation." Over the next 15 minutes, Richard told Dr. Fernandez the whole truth, from the encounter at the wedding to Vivian's destructive campaign. The doctor listened in silence, asking occasional questions. "It's a very complex situation," said the doctor at the end, "but observing the interaction between you, it's obvious that there is nothing inappropriate. The child demonstrates natural trust, not fear or discomfort. Thank you for believing in me. In fact, I want to help. If you need a medical testimony about the appropriate behavior I observed here, I will be available." Richard felt a wave of gratitude. Finally, someone in a respectable position was willing to support him publicly. When he returned home that afternoon, after ensuring that Isabella was stable, he found Vivian in the living room with an expression of satisfaction that immediately alarmed him. "How is your little protégée?" she asked with fake interest. "Better. She will be discharged tomorrow." "That's good. And how was your night at the hospital? Comfortable?" "Vivian, what did you do?" "Me? Nothing much. I just called some people telling them about your behavior yesterday." "What behavior?" "A married man spending the whole night in the hospital room of a child who is not his daughter, arguing with his own wife to defend this situation." Richard felt his stomach clench. "You made it sound like—" "I made it sound exactly like it is. Sick obsession. The girl was sick. She needed care. And where were the other relatives? Social services? Why did you have to be the hero?" "Because no one else cared." "Exactly," said Vivian with a cruel smile. "No one else cared. And that makes you look even more suspicious." At that moment, Richard's phone rang. It was Carl from the factory. "Richard, we have serious problems. The Labor Department showed up for a surprise inspection." "What kind of inspection?" "Verification of labor documentation. They said they received a complaint about irregularities in employee contracts." Richard looked at Vivian, who didn't bother to hide her satisfaction. "I'm going there now," he said, hanging up. "More trouble at work?" asked Vivian innocently. "You know exactly what problems these are." "How can I know? I don't understand anything about labor issues." But you understand how to make anonymous complaints. Richard, you're paranoid. Not every bad thing that happens in your life is my fault. All the ones that have happened lately are. At the factory, the situation was chaotic. The inspectors from the Labor Department were verifying each contract, each payroll, each document related to the employees. They are looking specifically for irregularities in payments, explained Carl, as if they knew exactly where to look. And are there any irregularities? Nothing serious. Some delays in depositing Social Security contributions, small differences in some payrolls, things that every company has and that normally go unnoticed. But that can be used to create problems. Exactly. The inspectors spent the whole day at the company, creating a climate of tension among the employees. Some began to question whether there was something more serious being hidden. John approached Richard during lunch. Boss, the employees are nervous. These constant inspections are creating a bad atmosphere. I know, John, I'm trying to solve it. But how? If someone is really reporting the company. Someone is, and I know who it is. Your wife, John asked directly. My wife? But that is monstrous. A woman destroying her own husband in this way. It's what's happening. Boss, you need to do something. The company won't withstand these pressures much longer. That night, Richard made a radical decision. He sought a lawyer specializing in family law and told his entire situation. It's a very complex case, said the lawyer, Dr. Anthony Rhodes. Your wife is using very sophisticated methods to destroy you. Can I do anything legally? Yes. We have the diversion of money from the joint account. We have the false complaints. We have the defamatory campaign. It's enough for a lawsuit for moral and material damages. And how long would it take? Months. Maybe years. I don't have that much time. My company is being destroyed now. Then I suggest a more direct strategy. Confront her publicly with evidence. How? Organize a meeting with the main people in the city, clients, suppliers, community leaders. Present all the evidence in a clear and objective way. That could work? If you have solid evidence? Yes. The truth has its own force. Richard spent the night organizing all the documents he had collected, bank statements showing Vivian's diversions, records of false complaints, testimonies from employees who had met Constance and Isabella. The next morning, he began making calls to schedule the meeting that would change everything. I want to clarify this situation once and for all, he said to each person he contacted. It's time for the whole truth to come out. Vivian watched everything with growing curiosity. What are you planning, Richard? You'll find out soon. I hope it's nothing stupid, because if it is, I can make things even worse for you. Worse than they already are? I doubt it. You underestimate my ability to destroy, and you underestimate my ability to fight. The meeting was scheduled for the weekend in the hall of the Business Association. Richard invited all the main business people in the city, suppliers, clients, community leaders, and even the mayor. It's going to be your last chance to tell your version before I tell mine, said Vivian on the eve of the meeting. My version is the truth, and the truth doesn't need a last chance. We'll see, she replied with a smile that promised total destruction. The hall of the Business Association was crowded on Saturday afternoon. Richard had managed to gather more than 50 people, business people, suppliers, clients, community leaders, and even some City Hall employees. Vivian arrived a few minutes before the start, accompanied by some friends, with a confident expression that only partially masked her anxiety. Good afternoon, everyone, began Richard, positioning himself in front of the hall. Thank you for coming. I know many of you are wondering why I called this meeting. Murmurs ran through the hall. People settled better in their chairs, clearly curious about what was to come. In recent weeks, my personal and professional reputation has been attacked by rumors and insinuations. Today, I want to clarify the whole truth. Vivian shifted uncomfortably in her chair, but maintained her smile. 4 months ago, on my wedding day, a hungry 6-year-old girl appeared at the party trying to get food. This girl is called Isabella, and she lives with her grandmother Constance in conditions of extreme poverty. Richard paused, observing the reactions in the hall. Some people nodded, remembering the incident. I decided to help them, buying food and necessary medications, a simple act of human solidarity that anyone with a minimum of compassion would do. "And where is the problem with that?" shouted someone from the audience. "The problem," continued Richard, "is that my wife violently opposed this help, and when I refused to stop, she began a systematic campaign to destroy my reputation and my business." The silence in the hall was absolute. All attention turned to Vivian, who had paled visibly. "Richard," she said, standing up, "you are embarrassing everyone with this." "Sit down," he said firmly. "Now it's my turn to speak." Vivian hesitated, but returned to her seat before the eyes of the entire audience. "My wife spread malicious rumors about my conduct with this family. She insinuated inappropriate behaviors on my part with a 6-year-old child. She contacted clients, suppliers, and even authorities to destroy my company." Richard removed a folder from the table next to him. "I have all the evidence here." He began to show the bank statements that proved Vivian's diversions from the joint account. "In the last 4 months, my wife withdrew $50,000 from our joint account, claiming household expenses that never happened. I have here all the invoices that prove that these expenses are non-existent." Murmurs of surprise ran through the hall. People began to lean forward, absorbing every detail. "In addition," continued Richard, "she made false complaints against my company to the health department and the labor department, trying to force the closure of the factory." "These are serious accusations," said the mayor of the city, who was in the front row. "These are accusations with evidence," replied Richard, showing documents that evidenced the dates of the complaints and their coincidence with the marital confrontations. Vivian stood up again, this time with more determination. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, addressing the audience, "my husband is going through a very difficult time. This obsession with a strange family has consumed our married life. All I did was try to protect our family." "Protect?" repeated Richard. "Spreading lies about me? Expressing legitimate concerns about your obsessive behavior." "Obsessive behavior?" Richard addressed the audience. "Let me introduce some people who can clarify what kind of behavior this is." To everyone's surprise, John Peterson, Mary Smith, and other factory employees stood up. "I would like to speak," said John. "John is my oldest employee," explained Richard. "He and other colleagues personally know the family I help." John went to the front of the hall. "People, I have known Mr. Thompson for 8 years. I have never seen a more honest and correct boss. 2 weeks ago, we were worried about the stories that were circulating, so we went to meet this family." He paused, emotional. "What we found was a sick, elderly woman taking care of an orphaned granddaughter alone, living in conditions of misery, and Mr. Thompson helping them in the purest and most disinterested way possible." Mary Smith approached. "The girl, Isabella, is an angel. When she saw the boss, she ran to hug him with pure joy. There is nothing, absolutely nothing inappropriate in his relationship with that family." "Where are these people now?" asked someone from the audience. "The girl is recovering from pneumonia in the hospital," replied Richard. "Pneumonia caused by malnutrition and lack of adequate medical care." Dr. Fernandez, who was present at the meeting, stood up. "I can confirm that. I treated the child in recent days." Richard behaved exemplarily, assuming all the costs of treatment as a true surrogate father. The support of the employees and the doctor was visibly changing the mood of the audience. People began to look at Vivian with growing distrust. "There is something else I need to reveal," said Richard, returning to his folder of documents. "I discovered that my wife did not act alone in this campaign." He removed some sheets of paper. I have here records of telephone calls that show that she systematically coordinated contacts with clients, suppliers, and authorities. That's invasion of privacy, protested Vivian. That's evidence of conspiracy to destroy a company and ruin a reputation, retorted Richard. The mayor stood up. Richard, these are very serious accusations. If you have evidence of false complaints— I have all the necessary evidence, replied Richard, and I am willing to hand it over to the competent authorities. Vivian realized that she was losing control of the situation. She tried one last card. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, addressing the audience with tears in her eyes, you are seeing a desperate man trying to justify inappropriate behaviors. All I did was try to protect a vulnerable child and our family. Protect a child? Repeated Mary Smith with indignation. You never cared about that girl. When she was hospitalized with pneumonia, where were you? I am not responsible for that child. Exactly, shouted John. You are not responsible for anything but your own malice. The audience began to murmur approval to the words of the employees. The climate was clearly changing against Vivian. There is one last thing, said Richard, returning to his folder. Yesterday my wife made a threat to me. She said she could make things even worse if I organized this meeting. He looked directly at Vivian. I would like to know what other lies you are preparing. Vivian stood up, trembling with anger. You want to know? I'll tell everyone. The hall was in absolute silence. Your perfect husband, she said with venom, is having an affair with the grandmother of that girl. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, to Vivian's surprise, some people began to laugh. Ma'am, said Dr. Fernandez, standing up, I know Constance Santos. She is 72 years old, has serious health problems, and is one of the most dignified people I've ever met. This accusation is as ridiculous as all the others you have invented. The laughter spread through the hall. Vivian had finally gone too far, making an accusation so absurd that it completely destroyed her credibility. In addition, continued the doctor, Constance spoke to me personally about Richard. She sees him as a son she never had, someone who appeared in their lives when they needed him most. Vivian looked around the hall and saw only faces of disapproval and disdain. Her campaign had completely collapsed. You will regret believing him, she said, heading for the exit. Mrs. Vivian, called the mayor before she left. If the evidence that Richard presented is confirmed, there will be legal consequences for the false complaints. Vivian stopped at the door, looked back one last time, and left the hall without saying anything more. When she left, the audience burst into applause for Richard, but he knew that the war was not over yet. In the days that followed the meeting, something extraordinary happened. The truth that Richard had exposed spread through the city like a purifying wave. Clients who had cancelled contracts called apologizing and wanting to resume business. Suppliers who had suspended deliveries returned to contact the factory. But what touched Richard the most was the reaction of the employees. On Monday, when he arrived at the company, he found everyone gathered in the main yard waiting for him. Boss, said John, speaking on behalf of the group, we want to apologize. We shouldn't have doubted you for a second. You did what you thought was right, replied Richard. The important thing is that now you know the truth. We know more than that, said Mary Smith. We know what kind of man you are, and we want to help. Help how? We want to get to know Constance and Isabella better. We want to be part of this help. To Richard's surprise, the employees had organized themselves and made a collection among themselves. They presented a modest but significant amount, intended to help the family. It's not much, said John, but it's from the heart. It's everything, replied Richard, emotional. It's proof that there is still goodness in the world. That afternoon, Richard took a delegation of employees to visit Isabella at the hospital. The girl had been discharged that morning and was at home with Constance, still recovering but visibly better. Mr. Thompson, shouted Isabella when she saw him arrive, you brought your friends. I did. They wanted to meet you and Grandma Constance." What followed was one of the most touching scenes Richard had ever witnessed. The employees, simple and hard-working people like Constance, immediately created a genuine connection with her and Isabella. "Constance," said Mary, "how long have you been raising this girl alone?" "Since she was 1 year old," replied Constance. "Her parents departed this world in an accident, and there was no one else." "And how did you manage to support you two?" "I collected recyclable material, did some cleaning jobs when they appeared, but with age and health problems—" "You don't need to worry about that anymore," said John firmly. "From now on, you have a bigger family." "How so?" "We all will help. Each a little, but together we can do a lot." Constance began to cry, not from sadness, but from a deep emotion that she had not felt for a long time. "Why would you do this for us?" "Because the boss taught us that taking care of each other is what makes us human," replied Mary. Isabella, observing the conversation with her big and curious eyes, approached Richard. "Mr. Thompson, now we have a very big family, right?" "Very big," he confirmed, picking her up in his arms. "And no one else will try to separate us?" Isabella's innocent question deeply touched everyone present. Richard looked at Constance, who nodded understandingly. "No one else, little one. Now we are a real family." Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Vivian faced the consequences of her actions. After the public humiliation at the meeting, she had locked herself in her house, refusing to answer phone calls or receive visitors. But on Tuesday she received a visit she could not ignore, the city sheriff, accompanied by a bailiff. "Mrs. Vivian Thompson?" asked the sheriff. "Yes," she replied reluctantly. "We have a search and seizure warrant related to the false complaints against local businesses." "False complaints?" "Based on the evidence presented by your husband, an investigation was opened into the use of false information to harm commercial establishments." Vivian watched helplessly as the officers collected documents, computer and telephone, looking for evidence of the complaints she had made. "We also have a summons here to testify about the diversion of funds from the joint marital account," continued the sheriff. For the first time since everything had started, Vivian realized that her actions had real legal consequences. It was no longer just a marital war, it had become a criminal matter. On Thursday, Richard received an unexpected call from Vivian's lawyer. "Mr. Thompson, my client would like to propose an agreement." "What kind of agreement?" "She recognizes that she made serious mistakes. She is willing to return all the diverted money and publicly admit that the accusations against you were false." "In exchange for what?" "For not proceeding with the criminal actions." Richard considered the proposal. Vivian was offering a way out that would give him back everything he had lost financially and completely restore his reputation. "I need to think," he said. "My client has 48 hours to respond." That night, Richard discussed the proposal with Constance and some of his closest employees. To his surprise, it was Constance who gave the wisest advice. "Young man," she said, "revenge never brought peace to anyone. If she is willing to acknowledge her mistakes and repair the damage, maybe it's time to forgive. But she destroyed almost everything I built, and you rebuilt it. You showed that the truth is stronger than lies, that goodness overcomes evil. That's worth more than any revenge. Do you really think I should accept? I think you should do what brings peace to your heart." Isabella, who was playing on the floor while the adults talked, approached Richard. "Mr. Thompson, are you sad?" "A little one. You know what Grandma taught me? That when we forgive, it gets lighter in here." She touched her own chest. The innocent wisdom of a 6-year-old child was what finally decided for Richard. On Friday, he called Vivian's lawyer. "I accept the agreement, but with an additional condition." "Which?" "In addition to the public acknowledgement of the false accusations, I want her to contribute financially to a fund to help needy families in the city." "How much?" "The $50,000 she diverted. Everything goes to that fund. I'll consult my client." 2 hours later, the lawyer called back. "She accepts all the conditions." On Saturday, Vivian published a public letter in the local newspaper taking full responsibility for the false accusations against Richard and apologizing to the community for the inconvenience caused. But for Richard, the most important moment was not Vivian's public retraction. It was on the afternoon of that same Saturday when he was at Constance and Isabella's house, watching the girl play in the yard with some children from the neighborhood who had come to visit her. "Mr. Thompson," said Isabella, running to him, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, little one. Now that you and Mrs. Vivian no longer live together, can you be my real daddy?" The question caught Richard off guard. He looked at Constance, who watched the scene with tears in her eyes. "Isabella," said Constance softly, "Mr. Thompson is already your daddy in heart, and that is more important than any paper." "But I wanted it to be official," insisted the girl. Richard knelt down to be at her height. "Isabella, if Grandma Constance agrees, we can talk about it." "Grandma?" Isabella looked hopefully at Constance. The elderly woman looked at Richard with infinite gratitude. "My granddaughter already has a father, the best father she could have." At that moment, under the golden afternoon sun, a new family was officially formed, not based on blood or conventions, but on genuine love and mutual choice. Vivian had tried to destroy Richard's goodness, but had only ended up revealing its true depth, and in the process she had brought to light something much more valuable than she would ever destroy, the proof that true love always finds a way. 3 months after the agreement with Vivian, Richard's life had completely transformed. The divorce was processed without complications. Vivian had waived any right to the couple's assets in exchange for the definitive closure of all criminal matters. She left Oakwood shortly after the finalization of the papers, saying she was going to start a new life in another city. The furniture factory not only recovered, but was thriving like never before. Richard's story had spread throughout the region, and many new clients sought out the company specifically because they wanted to do business with the businessman who takes care of the needy. "Boss," said Carl on a Tuesday morning, "we have 3 new contract proposals this week, companies from neighboring cities that want to work with us." "Why?" asked Richard, although he already knew the answer. "Because your reputation has reached them. They say they want to associate with someone with solid values. And how is production? Working to the limit. Maybe it's time to think about expanding." Richard smiled. A few months ago, he was on the verge of bankruptcy. Now he considered expanding the business, but the biggest transformation was happening in his personal life. Constance had moved to a larger house in the center of town, a house that Richard had rented for them with 3 bedrooms, a large yard, and all the necessary structure for a dignified life. "Isn't it too much?" Constance had protested when she saw the house. "It's the least you deserve," he replied. "But young man, we don't need so much luxury." "Constance, this is not luxury. It's dignity." Constance's health had improved drastically with regular medical follow-up and up-to-date medications. She had even gotten a light job as a cleaning supervisor at Richard's own factory, a role that gave her purpose and financial independence without requiring excessive physical effort. "Constance is an excellent supervisor," Mary Smith had commented, "organized, dedicated, and highly respected by the employees." "She has always been a natural worker," replied Richard. "She just needed an opportunity." Isabella was unrecognizable. The thin and frightened girl who had appeared at the wedding had transformed into a vibrant and curious child. She attended a good private school, where she stood out for her intelligence and natural kindness. "Daddy Richard," she said one afternoon. She had started calling him that naturally after the adoption process had been initiated. "The teacher said I draw very well. Show me." Isabella ran to get her drawing notebooks. The pages were filled with colorful illustrations. No longer the sad and trapped birds she drew in the time of deprivation, but happy families, houses with flower gardens, children playing. "This one is us," she said. showing a drawing where three figures were holding hands in front of a house. "Grandma Constance, me and you. It's beautiful, little one. And this one is you on the day you showed up at the wedding." She turned the page, revealing a drawing of a tall man giving brownies to a little girl. "The teacher said it was the most important day of my life." "Why did she say that?" "Because it was the day I got a daddy." Isabella's words touched Richard deeply. For him, that day had been the beginning of a war that almost destroyed him. For her, it had been the beginning of a new life. On a Thursday, Richard received an unexpected visit to the office. It was Dr. Fernandez, but not on medical matters. "Richard, can I talk to you about a personal matter?" "Of course, doctor." "Sit down. It's about the aid fund you created with the agreement money." Richard had used the $50,000 returned by Vivian to create a fund to help needy families in the region, the Isabella Fund, as it had been named. "What about the fund?" "It's working so well that other people want to contribute, business people, professionals, even public employees. They want to make regular donations." "Seriously?" "Very serious. Your story has inspired many people, Richard. People want to be part of this chain of solidarity. That's amazing. There's something more. The mayor wants to propose that the city make the fund official, incorporating it into the city's social programs." "What would that mean?" "It would mean that your individual gesture became a community movement. You showed the whole city that it's possible to make a difference." That night Richard had dinner at Constance and Isabella's new house, as had become routine every Thursday. It was his favorite time of the week. The three gathered as a family, talking about the day, making plans for the weekend. "Daddy Richard," said Isabella while helping to clear the table, "can I tell you a secret?" "Of course, little one. I don't remember very well about before, when you didn't exist in our life. It's like you've always been here." Constance, who was washing dishes at the sink, smiled emotionally. "For me too," she said. "It seems like the young man has always been part of our family." "Do you know what the truth is?" said Richard, hugging the two. "It's that I was lost before I met you. I thought I had a full life, but I didn't. You taught me what real family is." "And what is real family?" asked Isabella. "It's taking care of each other, not because we are forced to, but because we choose to. It's being present in difficult times. It's sharing joys and sharing sorrows. And it's forgiving when someone makes a mistake," added Constance. "Exactly. Like you forgave Vivian?" Isabella's question caught Richard off guard. The girl had an impressive memory and a capacity for understanding that sometimes surprised him. "How do you know about that?" "I heard you and Grandma talking. She said you were very good at forgiving." Richard looked at Constance, who nodded encouragingly. "I forgave because holding on to anger hurts us more than the person who hurt us, and because I learned that forgiveness is not about forgetting what happened, but about not letting it control our life." She was very bad. She was very lost. Sometimes lost people do bad things. And now she is no longer lost. I hope not. I hope she has learned something and is happier where she is now. That night, after Isabella fell asleep, Richard and Constance talked on the porch of the house about the last few months. "Young man," said Constance, "can I ask you something that has always intrigued me?" "Of course. Why did you do all this for us, from the first day, when you didn't even know us well?" Richard thought for a moment before answering. "Remember when I told you that I grew up an orphan?" "I remember. Throughout my childhood, I dreamed that someone would appear in my life and change everything. Someone who would care about me without wanting anything in return. And someone appeared? No, I had to build my life alone, with a lot of effort. But when I saw Isabella at that wedding, hungry and desperate, I realized that I could be for her what I always wanted someone to be for me. The angel you needed when you were a child." "Exactly. But I discovered something interesting in the process." "What?" "I discovered that when you are someone's angel, you are also saved. You saved me as much as I saved you." Constance held Richard's hand affectionately. "Young man, you know you will always be part of our family, right? Even when Isabella grows up, even when I am no longer here." "Don't talk like that, Constance. It's the truth of life, young man. But what we built together will last forever. The love we created here will pass from generation to generation." That night, while driving back to his house, Richard thought about how his life had changed completely. He had lost a wife who never truly loved him, but gained a family that loved him unconditionally. The war that Vivian had declared against his goodness had not only failed, it had further strengthened his determination to do good, and in the process, it had revealed to the entire community that genuine compassion is a force more powerful than any evil. The next morning, Richard woke up with a certainty that he had not felt for a long time. His life was finally exactly where it should be. 8 months after that wedding that changed everything, Richard was in the living room of his house arranging some documents when he received a call he did not expect. It was from Vivian. "Richard, it's me." Her voice sounded different, softer, less arrogant. He hesitated before answering. "Vivian, what do you want?" I want to apologize. For real this time." Richard sat down, curious despite everything. "We already made the agreement. Everything was resolved. I'm not talking about legal issues, I'm talking about human issues." Silence stretched for a few seconds. "Richard, are you still there?" "I am. I just didn't expect to hear this from you." "I know. For months I hated you for having humiliated me publicly, but then I started therapy and realized that you didn't humiliate me. I humiliated myself." "Vivian, let me finish, please. I need to say this." Her voice trembled slightly. "You are a good man. You always have been, and I was so empty inside, so focused on appearances and status, that I couldn't accept that someone did good without wanting anything in return. And now? Now I'm trying to learn to be a better person. I don't know if I'll succeed, but I'm trying." Richard thought for a moment before answering. "Vivian, I forgave you a long time ago, and I sincerely hope that you find the peace you are looking for." "Thank you." "And Richard?" "Yes? How are they? Constance and Isabella?" The question surprised him. Throughout the war, Vivian had referred to them with disdain, as if they were less than human. "They're fine. Very well." "That's good. They deserve all the happiness in the world. And you too." After hanging up, Richard spent a few minutes processing the conversation. There was something genuine in Vivian's voice that he had never heard before. Maybe she really was changing. That afternoon, he went to pick up Isabella from school, as he had done every day since the adoption process had been finalized. The girl ran to hug him as she always did, but this time there was a special excitement in her eyes. "Daddy! Daddy! I have a surprise." "What surprise?" "The teacher wants to talk to you. She said it's about something very important." Richard went to the teacher's room, Mrs. Davis, an experienced woman who had been enchanted with Isabella from the first day. "Mr. Thompson, thank you for coming. I wanted to talk about Isabella." "Did she do something?" "Yes, she did. Something extraordinary." Mrs. Davis smiled. "She won the school's writing contest." "Writing contest?" "Yes. The theme was My Family, and her text was so touching that the judges decided unanimously. She will represent our school in the state contest." "Can I read it?" "Of course. In fact, with your permission, I would like to read it to you." Mrs. Davis picked up a sheet of paper and began to read with an emotional voice. "My family is different from my friends' families, but it's the most beautiful family in the world. I wasn't born in my mum's belly, and my daddy didn't meet me when I was a baby. My family started on a day that I was very hungry, and a good man gave me brownies. Before that, Grandma Constance and I lived in a small house, and sometimes we didn't have food. Grandma worked hard collecting cans, but she got sick and couldn't work. I drew birds in the dirt because I wanted to fly to a place where there was always food. Then one day I went to a wedding to look for food, and I met my daddy, Richard. He was different from the other people because he didn't get angry with me. He gave me sweets and then started sending food to me and Grandma. I thought he was an angel. A bad woman tried to separate him from us because she didn't want him to help us. She told lies about my daddy and almost managed to destroy everything. But my daddy fought hard to stay with us because real family doesn't give up on each other. Now me, Grandma, and my daddy live in different houses, but our hearts live together. Grandma works at my daddy's company and has medicine so she doesn't get sick. I go to a good school and have friends. And my daddy smiles much more than before. The teacher said that family is who loves us, takes care of us, and never abandons us. So I have the most perfect family in the world, even though it's different, because the love that unites us is greater than anything bad that can happen. And now I don't draw trapped birds anymore. I draw free birds, flying high in the blue sky, because that's how I feel every day. When Mrs. Davis finished reading, there were tears in her eyes and in Richard's. "She wrote this alone?" he asked, emotional. "Completely alone." All the time, I just watched her writing with a smile on her face. "Daddy, did you like it?" asked Isabella, who had been quiet during the reading. Richard knelt down and hugged his daughter tightly. "I loved it, little one. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard in my life. Is everything I wrote true?" "Every word." That night, there was a special celebration at Constance's house. Richard brought pizza, soda, and a chocolate cake to celebrate Isabella's victory in the contest. "Grandma," said Isabella while they ate, "is Daddy Richard crying?" "They are tears of joy, my dear," explained Constance, who was also emotional. "Why?" "Because sometimes happiness is so much that it comes out through the eyes," said Richard, wiping away the tears and laughing. "Then I'm also crying with joy," declared Isabella, making everyone laugh. After the girl went to sleep, Richard and Constance sat on the porch to talk as they always did. "Young man," said Constance, "you read Isabella's essay and saw how she understands everything that happened." "I did. She has a wisdom that many adults don't have. It's because she went through suffering very early, but also because she found true love. That marks a child forever. Constance, can I tell you something?" "Of course." "Today, Vivian called me." Constance raised her eyebrows, surprised. "And what did she want?" "To apologize, for real this time. She said she's doing therapy and starting to understand what she did." "And how did you feel?" "Relieved. Because I realized that I don't feel angry with her anymore, just pity. Pity. Pity because she lost the chance to participate in something beautiful. She could have been part of this family, this happiness, but she chose the path of destruction. And now? Now I hope she finds her own happiness away from us." Constance nodded wisely. "Complete forgiveness is when we can wish good, even for those who have harmed us. I think I've finally gotten there." "You have. And you know what else?" "What?" "The story of our family is still just beginning. Isabella will grow up, maybe give us grandchildren, and this story of love and overcoming will pass on to future generations." "You think so?" "I'm sure. Because what we built here was not just a family. It was proof that good always wins, that kindness is contagious, that a simple attitude can change entire lives." Richard looked at the stars in the sky and thought about how everything had started with a hungry girl trying to get sweets at a wedding. What an extraordinary chain of events that simple attitude of compassion had unleashed. "Constance," he said, "do you remember what I said on the first day I came here? That I was just doing the right thing." "I remember. Today I realized that I wasn't just doing the right thing. I was doing the only possible thing for someone who has a heart. And you discovered that when we follow our heart, even when everyone says we are wrong, the universe conspires to give us reason." "Exactly." That night, while returning home, Richard thought about the perfect circle that his life had completed. He had started an orphan, built a company alone, married the wrong person, almost lost everything, but found his true family in the process. The war that Vivian had declared against his goodness had not only failed, it had resulted in the greatest victory of his life, because it had forced him to choose between convenience and his values, and he had chosen right. 8 months ago, he was just a successful but empty businessman. Today, he was the father of an extraordinary girl, the son of a wise woman, the leader of a community that had learned the value of solidarity. The girl who had appeared hungry at his wedding had not only found food, she had found a family, and he, unknowingly, had found his too. Some stories begin with happily ever after endings. This story began with a man discovering that sometimes the greatest gifts in life come disguised as problems we need to solve. And that true wealth is not in what we accumulate, but in what we share. Not in what we conquer, but in what we build. Not in what we possess, but in what we are able to give. The little Isabella had taught a successful businessman the most important lesson of all, that true love is not about deserving, but about choosing. And that family is not about blood, but about commitment. And as the stars shone, 3 hearts slept in peace, knowing that they had found each other against all odds, and that nothing in the world would be able to separate them again.